Good children make broken adults. That sounds cruel, doesn't it? Like something a bitter person would say after years of failure and blame. But if you've ever looked around at your life and thought, why do I always feel guilty for saying no? Or why do I keep attracting people who take advantage of me? Then maybe you're starting to realize being a good kid came with a cost. Now, Carl Jung didn't say those words exactly, but his life's work reveals one brutal truth. Most people spend their adult lives cleaning up the emotional mess their childhood never let them acknowledge. You weren't just taught manners. You were taught to ignore your instincts, to smile when you were sad, to obey instead of think, to please instead of express. And society applauded you for it. But let's ask the hard question. What if your politeness is just fear in disguise? What if your empathy is actually unhealed guilt? What if your selflessness is just a habit you built from constantly being overlooked? You see, this video isn't about blaming your parents, your teachers, or your childhood. It's about finally seeing the code you were programmed with and deciding whether it's time to rewrite it. Because the very habits that made you lovable as a child are making you invisible as an adult. Let's break down these silent patterns one by one, using the lens of Carl Jung's shadow work and the stoic realism of Marcus Aurelius, to finally understand not what you were taught to be, but what you were born to be before the world told you otherwise. 1. The compliment fishing trap. You were praised for being such a good girl or a smart boy, but Carl Jung would call this ego inflation through external validation. He taught that the more you identify with the mask, the persona, you show to others, the more disconnected you become from your true self. You didn't learn how to feel worthy. You learned how to perform for approval. Marcus Aurelius would have warned you, it's not the praise that makes you good, but the strength to remain unaffected by it. Yet here you are, chasing likes, compliments, affirmations, addicted to being seen but terrified of being known. 2. The lingering comparison ghost. Growing up, maybe you heard, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Or, "Look how well your cousin does in school." This planted a seed, the comparison complex, which Carl Jung would say creates a false shadow. You start living someone else's life, someone else's timeline, someone else's dream. Jung believed that comparison is the thief of individuation, your ability to become you. And Marcus Aurelius would remind you, it never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. You were trained to compete instead of connect. 3. The Clean Plate Club curse. Finish your food. There are starving kids out there. That innocent phrase birthed a lifetime of guilt-based obedience. Jung would interpret this as the subconscious association of morality with compliance. You weren't taught boundaries. You were taught to override your needs out of obligation. Marcus Aurelius, ever the Stoic, would challenge you. Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary? Yet most adults don't ask. They eat the meal, do the task, say yes to the invite, not out of desire, but guilt. 4. The because I said so thinking. You were raised in a world where obedience wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Questions were seen as disrespect. Independent thought was punished, not praised. And curiosity, that was labeled talking back. You quickly learned that survival meant silence, that the fastest way to avoid trouble was to nod, agree, and follow the rules, even when they made no sense. You began measuring your intelligence by how well you could conform, not by how clearly you could think. But Carl Jung warned us about this exact dynamic. He said the greatest threat to an individual's development is not disobedience, it's blind obedience. Because when you obey without thinking, you begin to lose the most sacred voice you'll ever have, your own. You stop trusting your intuition. You start believing that authority is always right, and that your job is to comply, even when your heart screams no. And over time, that scream fades. Not because the injustice is gone, but because you've silenced the only person who could speak against it, yourself. Marcus Aurelius didn't follow blindly. He ruled an empire and still paused each morning to examine his own beliefs. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. But here's the problem. How do you even know what's right if your moral compass was never allowed to develop? How do you speak the truth if truth was always defined for you by someone else's voice? This kind of upbringing doesn't create strong individuals. It creates compliant ones. And the cost of that compliance is autonomy. You begin living a life based on rules, roles, and routines that were handed to you, not chosen by you. And one day you wake up and realize you've been living someone else's story. 5. The seen not heard curse. Don't speak unless spoken to. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. These weren't just harsh words. They were lessons in emotional muting. You learned that your feelings were inconvenient, that your voice disrupted the order, that your sadness, your joy, your frustration, none of it was welcome unless it fit neatly inside someone else's comfort zone. So, you did what all children do when faced with the impossible. You adapted, you shrunk, you swallowed your voice and along with it your self-worth. Carl Jung understood this tragedy. He believed that children forced to suppress emotion in order to survive do not forget. They bury. And where do they bury it? In the unconscious. But the unconscious does not stay buried. It waits. It waits until you're 28 or 35 or 52, and suddenly a minor argument feels like a betrayal. A small rejection triggers a volcanic rage. Or maybe it doesn't come out as anger at all. Maybe it turns inward, into depression, into anxiety, into a quiet sense that something is deeply wrong, but you can't quite name it. Marcus Aurelius preached mastery over the mind. He said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." But how do you master something you were never taught to acknowledge? How do you become emotionally intelligent when your emotional education was built on silence and shame? Suppressing emotion does not create strength. It creates pressure, and pressure always finds a way out. Whether through rage, addiction, withdrawal, or illness, the cost of silence is never silence. It always comes due. 6. The tiny karma dealer, people pleaser. Somewhere along the way, you discovered a hidden formula. Be nice and people will like you. Say yes and they won't leave. Smile and they'll reward you. You became skilled at reading what others needed, and even better at giving it to them. It felt like love. It felt like connection. But Carl Jung would call this something far more dangerous, the creation of a false self, a version of you crafted not from truth, but from performance. You weren't being kind. You were negotiating, offering small acts of self-sacrifice in exchange for approval, safety, and belonging. Jung believed that when kindness lacks boundaries, it turns into manipulation, not the malicious kind, but the desperate kind. The childlike hope that if you're good enough, people will stay, that if you're useful enough, they won't hurt you, that if you're agreeable enough, you won't be rejected. You don't say yes out of love, you say yes out of fear. And what would Marcus Aurelius say to this? He'd offer a cold, sobering truth. What is it to you if others speak ill of you? The Stoic does not live for applause. He lives in alignment with reason, with virtue, and with inner peace, not social validation. People-pleasing to the Stoic is not kindness. It is insecurity dressed up as morality. The problem with being a nice guy or nice girl all the time is this. Eventually, you disappear. You bend so much that no one knows what you really want, and worse, you don't either. You become a ghost in your own life, smiling, helpful, invisible. True kindness begins where fear ends, and that means risking the loss of approval to reclaim your truth. 7. The conflict coward curse. You grew up in a home where tension filled the air like smoke. Arguments didn't just disturb the peace, they shattered it. So, like many children, you adapted. You kept your voice down. You became agreeable. You apologized, even when you weren't wrong. You learned over time that your safety depended on your silence. And so, you developed a quiet superpower. You could read a room in seconds, sense anger before it exploded, and shape-shift into whatever version of yourself caused the least amount of friction. But here's the damage. In learning how to avoid conflict, you never learned how to handle it. You became skilled at not upsetting people, but completely unskilled at standing your ground. You began equating peace with absence of tension, not the presence of truth. And this is the curse that Carl Jung warned about, the cost of suppressing your shadow. Jung taught that suppressed anger doesn't vanish. It leaks. It festers in your body, infects your relationships, and distorts your sense of reality. What you refuse to express in honest conversation, you will inevitably express in dysfunction through passive aggression, sudden explosions, or complete emotional shutdown. Marcus Aurelius knew the weight of unspoken emotion, especially among men tasked with bearing responsibility. He understood that true mastery wasn't avoiding confrontation, but facing it with clarity. Kindness is invincible, he wrote, but only when it's honest. Stoicism doesn't mean suppressing what you feel. It means owning your emotions, examining them, and delivering them with reason rather than rage. But how can you speak honestly when you've spent your whole life trying not to make anyone uncomfortable? Avoiding conflict might have kept you safe as a child, but as an adult, it's keeping you small. You can't build deep, meaningful connections if you're constantly walking on eggshells, because truth without conflict is rare, and connection without truth is impossible. You weren't meant to be invisible. You were meant to be true. And true people sometimes make waves. 8. The good kid feeling trap. You were the one everyone could count on, the quiet one, the well-behaved one, the kid who didn't cause problems. You picked up the pieces when things fell apart. You made people laugh when they were sad. You helped clean up messes, physical and emotional, without ever being asked. And you got your reward. Adults praised you. They said, "You're so mature for your age." They told others how lucky they were to have a child like you. But no one ever asked how heavy it was to carry that role. You learned to feel valuable not by being authentic, but by being useful. You learned to earn love, not receive it freely. Over time, this became your identity. You became addicted to being okay. You smiled even when you were breaking. You became the emotional sponge in every relationship, the helper, the fixer, the one who never needs help themselves. Carl Jung would call this the birth of the false self, a mask worn so consistently that even you begin to forget who's underneath it. Jung believed that when children adapt too early, they create a persona built entirely on survival, not truth, and that persona follows them into adulthood. You become someone who feels guilty for resting, uncomfortable receiving, and deeply ashamed when you're not doing well. Behind the smile is a storm, and most people never see it. Marcus Aurelius, too, would see this as a life out of balance. He believed in duty, yes, but also in knowing your limits. If it's endurable, then endure it. If not, stop complaining. But the problem is, many adults don't even know what's endurable anymore. They've been enduring everything for so long, they've lost the ability to tell the difference between patience and punishment. You don't know when you're supposed to speak up because you've been praised for your silence for decades. Being the good kid may have earned you love back then, but now it's costing you your authenticity. Real connection, real fulfillment, and real peace only come when you drop the mask. When you stop managing people's emotions and start honoring your own. It's terrifying. It's unfamiliar. But it's the beginning of the real you, the one who was never allowed to fully exist. So here you are, grown, smart, capable, but still haunted by habits that started when you were 6. Carl Jung believed healing begins when the unconscious becomes conscious. Marcus Aurelius believed that wisdom begins when we live by nature, not by habit. It's time to choose. Will you keep wearing the good kid mask because it feels safe? Or will you finally become who you were before the world taught you to be quiet, nice, and obedient? Because the truth is simple. Your childhood isn't over, not until you decide it is.